The emergency dispatcher received the call at 9:47 p.m. on October 14, 2023. The voice on the line belonged to a young man who identified himself as Marcus Caldwell, 28 years old, reporting that his father had collapsed during dinner at their family home in Scottsdale, Arizona. The address corresponded to a property in the Silverleaf community, an exclusive residential area known for its privacy, gated access, and multi-million-dollar estates overlooking the McDowell Mountains. Paramedics from Scottsdale Fire Department arrived within 12 minutes and found the residence illuminated from within, its front door already open. Marcus met them at the entrance, visibly distressed, directing them toward the dining room where his father remained seated in a leather chair, head tilted backward, arms resting along the armrests. Raymond Caldwell, 61 years old, was pronounced dead at the scene. The paramedics noted no visible trauma, no signs of physical altercation, and no evidence suggesting a violent struggle. The table before him held 2 dinner plates, both partially consumed, along with wine glasses, silverware arranged neatly, and a ceramic serving dish containing what appeared to be braised lamb. The room itself reflected careful organization. It's nothing overturned, no scattered objects, no disorder that might indicate panic or distress during the final moments. One paramedic later remarked to investigators that the scene felt staged, though she could not immediately articulate why. Marcus explained that he and his father had been sharing a quiet meal, something they had done regularly since his mother passed away 3 years earlier. According to his account, Raymond had taken several bites of food, mentioned feeling slightly warm, then suddenly gasped, clutched at his chest, and became unresponsive. Marcus stated he immediately called emergency services and attempted chest compressions while waiting for help to arrive. He provided these details in a measured tone, pausing occasionally to wipe his eyes, though investigators would later note the absence of tears. Detective Laura Simmons, 34 years old, arrived shortly after the paramedics completed their initial assessment. Simmons had worked homicide cases for 6 years and had developed an instinct for recognizing inconsistencies in witness statements. She observed Marcus standing near the kitchen counter, arms crossed, responding to questions from uniformed officers with rehearsed precision. His answers contained no hesitation, no confusion, no deviation, even when asked to repeat certain details. Most people confronted with sudden death displayed emotional fragmentation, scattered recollections, difficulty maintaining linear timelines. Marcus displayed none of these. His narrative remained consistent through multiple retellings. Simmons conducted a preliminary walkthrough of the residence. The home reflected wealth accumulated over decades. Original artwork hung along the hallways, custom furniture filled each room, and floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of the surrounding desert landscape. In the study adjacent to the dining area, she observed filing cabinets, a desktop computer, and shelves lined with financial documents related to Raymond's career as a venture capital investor. On the desk sat a framed photograph showing Raymond and Marcus during a hiking trip, both men smiling against a backdrop of red rock formations. Simmons made no assumptions about the relationship, but documented the setting as part of the broader context. The kitchen revealed remnants of meal preparation. A cutting board, marinade bowl, roasting pan, and various utensils sat near the sink, some already rinsed, others still bearing traces of food residue. Simmons instructed the forensic technician to photograph and secure all materials related to the dinner. She noted that Marcus had prepared the meal himself, stating his father preferred home-cooked food over restaurant dining. When asked what they had eaten, Marcus listed braised lamb with rosemary, roasted vegetables, and a red wine reduction sauce. He emphasized that both he and his father consumed identical portions from the same serving dishes. During the initial interview, Simmons asked Marcus about his father's recent health. Marcus described Raymond as generally fit for his age, active in managing his investment portfolio, and maintaining a disciplined exercise routine. He denied any history of cardiac problems, though he mentioned his father occasionally complained about work-related stress. When pressed for specifics, Marcus explained that Raymond had been reviewing estate planning documents in recent weeks and seemed preoccupied with securing his financial legacy. Simmons noted the phrasing, not concerned about health but focused on legacy. The distinction felt deliberate. Before clearing the scene, Simmons examined the dining table more closely. Raymond's wine glass contained approximately 2 inches of red wine. His plate showed evidence of consumption, fork marks visible in the lamb and vegetables. Marcus's plate reflected similar engagement with the meal. A serving spoon rested inside the ceramic dish, its handle angled toward the center. Everything appeared ordinary except for one detail. Raymond's napkin lay folded beside his plate, untouched, as though he had not used it even once during the meal. Simmons photographed the arrangement and marked the napkin for collection. The paramedics, having completed their documentation, informed Simmons that while the presentation suggested cardiac arrest, Raymond's facial expression and body positioning raised questions. One paramedic described the rigidity as inconsistent with a typical heart attack, noting instead a pattern sometimes observed in cases involving toxin exposure. The observation prompted Simmons to request an autopsy despite the apparent naturalness of the death. She explained her reasoning to the medical examiner on duty. The controlled environment, the precise organization of the scene, and Marcus's overly composed demeanor all warranted further scrutiny. By 11 p.m., the residence was secured. Forensic technicians labeled evidence containers, removed food samples, drinking glasses, utensils, and all materials connected to the meal preparation. Simmons completed her preliminary interview with Marcus, informing him that the autopsy results would determine next steps and that he might be contacted again for additional questions. Marcus acknowledged this calmly, stating he planned to stay at the house overnight, since it was his primary residence. Simmons found this detail noteworthy. He lived with his father. The financial implications of Raymond's death would directly impact Marcus's living situation, inheritance prospects, and access to resources. Simmons returned to her vehicle and reviewed her notes. She had documented the timeline, the meal details, Marcus's statements, and the physical evidence collected from the scene. Nothing definitive yet, but patterns were emerging. A son living with his wealthy father, a carefully prepared dinner, a sudden death with no prior warning, and a scene arranged with such precision that it felt rehearsed rather than spontaneous. She flagged the case for priority follow-up and requested expedited toxicology screening. The investigation was just beginning. Detective Laura Simmons began the secondary phase of investigation on October 15, 2023, by establishing a comprehensive profile of the Caldwell family dynamics and financial structure. Her first objective centered on understanding Raymond Caldwell's professional background and asset distribution. Documents obtained from his investment firm, Caldwell Ventures, LLC, confirmed that Raymond held sole ownership and managed a diversified portfolio valued at approximately $14 million. The portfolio included commercial real estate holdings, private equity stakes in technology startups, municipal bonds, and liquid assets distributed across multiple accounts. Tax filings showed consistent income generation over the previous decade, with no significant debt obligations or financial irregularities. Interviews with Raymond's business associates painted a picture of methodical discipline. His longtime accountant, Patricia Brennan, described Raymond as cautious with capital allocation and deeply protective of the wealth he had accumulated through careful investment strategies. She mentioned that Raymond had scheduled several meetings during September to review estate planning options and had expressed concern about ensuring his assets would be managed responsibly after his death. When asked whether Raymond discussed specific beneficiaries, Brennan stated he referenced his son, but also mentioned exploring charitable foundations focused on education access for underprivileged communities. Simmons then shifted focus to Marcus Caldwell's financial situation. Bank records obtained through judicial authorization revealed a starkly different picture. Marcus held 3 credit cards, all carrying balances near their maximum limits. His checking account showed recurring overdraft fees and a pattern of minimum payments that barely covered accruing interest. Additional records indicated personal loans totaling $68,000 from 2 separate lenders, both carrying interest rates exceeding 18%. Most significantly, Simmons discovered that Marcus had no documented income for the past 11 months. His last employment, a marketing position at a tech firm, had ended in November 2022. Since then, his expenses had been covered almost entirely through transfers from a joint account he shared with Raymond. A deeper examination of transaction histories showed a troubling escalation. Between March and September 2023, Marcus had requested increasingly larger transfers from his father. The amounts progressed from $1,500 monthly to nearly $4,000 by August. In early October, just 2 weeks before Raymond's death, A requested transfer of $5,000 was denied. Banknotes attached to the transaction indicated Raymond had placed restrictions on the joint account, limiting Marcus's withdrawal capabilities. Simmons documented this timeline as potentially relevant to motive. Neighbors in the Silverleaf community provided additional context. One resident recalled seeing Marcus and Raymond engaged in what appeared to be a heated discussion on the front driveway approximately 10 days before the incident. The neighbor could not hear specific words, but described Raymond's body language as firm and Marcus's as agitated. Another neighbor mentioned that Marcus had seemed increasingly withdrawn during recent months, often leaving the property late at night and returning in the early morning hours. When asked about Raymond's behavior, neighbors consistently described him as courteous, private, and focused on maintaining a low profile within the community. The preliminary autopsy report arrived on October 17th. Delivered by medical examiner Dr. Kenneth Reyes. The report documented no external injuries, no defensive wounds, and no indicators of chronic cardiac disease. However, Reyes noted abnormalities in the liver tissue coloration and gastric lining that suggested chemical irritation. The stomach contents revealed partially digested food consistent with the meal described by Marcus, but also trace elements of a substance not typically present in culinary preparations. Reyes recommended comprehensive toxicology screening on blood, tissue, and gastric samples. He estimated time of death at approximately 9:30 p.m., roughly 17 minutes before the emergency call was placed. Simmons returned to the Caldwell residence on October 18th with a forensic team authorized to conduct an expanded search. The focus extended beyond the dining area to include Marcus's bedroom, personal storage spaces, and any locations where restricted substances might be concealed. In Marcus's bedroom closet, investigators examined shelving units and found a laptop computer, external hard drive, and a leather portfolio containing financial documents. The portfolio held printed copies of Raymond's investment summaries, property deeds, and estate valuation reports. Several pages displayed handwritten notes in Marcus's handwriting, calculating potential inheritance distributions and projected timelines for probate processing. One document particularly caught Simmons's attention. A page torn from a legal pad contained columns labeled immediate liquidity, real estate conversion, and portfolio access. Next to each column were dollar figures that closely matched Raymond's actual asset values. At the bottom of the page, Marcus had written a single phrase, underlined twice: October resolution. The date alignment was impossible to ignore. The note suggested Marcus had anticipated accessing his father's wealth during October, the same month Raymond died. Digital forensic specialists began examining Marcus's laptop and quickly identified concerning search history. Between September 28th and October 13th, Marcus had conducted multiple queries related to substances that could simulate cardiac arrest. Detection timelines for various toxins, probate procedures in Arizona, and inheritance tax implications for estates exceeding $10 million. The searches also included specific inquiries about compounds used in pest control and agricultural applications, particularly those with rapid absorption rates and minimal residual detection. One search entry stood out for its specificity. On October 9th, Marcus had typed, "How long does arsenic stay in system after death?" Another search from October 11th asked, "Untraceable poisons that cause heart attack symptoms." Simmons documented each query with screenshots and timestamps. The pattern suggested not casual curiosity, but deliberate research with practical application in mind. Further investigation revealed Marcus had visited a hardware supply store in Tempe on October 8th. Credit card records confirmed a purchase totaling $47. When contacted, the store manager reviewed transaction details and identified the items: heavy-duty gloves, a respirator mask, and a container of concentrated rodenticide containing a chemical compound known for its toxicity and rapid effect on cardiac function. The manager recalled the customer asking whether the product worked quickly and whether it dissolved in liquid. Simmons obtained surveillance footage showing Marcus at the checkout counter, paying with his credit card and declining a receipt. The toxicology report arrived on October 20th, 2023. Earlier than standard processing timelines typically allowed, Dr. Kenneth Reyes contacted Detective Laura Simmons directly to discuss the findings. The laboratory had identified a chemical compound consistent with bromethylene, a neurotoxic substance commonly used in commercial rodenticides. The concentration detected in Raymond Caldwell's bloodstream and gastric contents indicated ingestion shortly before death, likely within 30 to 45 minutes of collapse. Reyes explained that bromethylene disrupted cellular function rapidly, causing symptoms that could easily be mistaken for cardiac arrest, chest pain, difficulty breathing, loss of consciousness, and death within minutes of symptom onset. The medical examiner emphasized two critical details. First, the concentration found in Raymond's system far exceeded accidental exposure levels. Second, chemical analysis of the gastric contents revealed the compound had been mixed with an oil-based substance, likely the wine reduction sauce served with the lamb. This method of delivery would mask the bitter taste characteristic of the poison and ensure rapid absorption through the digestive tract. Reyes concluded his report by stating that Raymond's death was not natural and recommended the case be classified as a homicide investigation. Simmons immediately coordinated with the forensic team to re-examine all materials collected from the Caldwell residence. Laboratory technicians conducted detailed testing on food remnants, cookware, and residue recovered from the kitchen sink. Results showed trace amounts of bromethylene in the roasting pan used for the lamb, concentrated primarily in the section where the wine reduction sauce had been prepared. Significantly, tests on Marcus's dinner plate and utensils returned negative for the compound. Only Raymond's plate, fork, and the serving spoon used to portion the lamb showed contamination. The selective application supported a theory of deliberate poisoning rather than accidental contamination during meal preparation. Simmons revisited the timeline of the evening. According to Marcus's statement, he had spent approximately 90 minutes preparing dinner while Raymond worked in his study. Network activity logs from the home internet connection showed Marcus's laptop accessed several web pages during that period, including one related to proper dosing of rodenticides and another discussing absorption rates when mixed with fatty substances. The timestamps placed these searches within the same window when Marcus claimed to be focused solely on cooking. With mounting evidence pointing toward Marcus, Simmons shifted her attention to establishing motive beyond financial desperation. She contacted Raymond's attorney, Thomas Whitmore, who had represented the Caldwell family for over 15 years. Whitmore initially hesitated to discuss client matters, but upon learning the investigation had been classified as homicide, he agreed to provide relevant information. His disclosure transformed the entire case. Whitmore revealed that Raymond had visited his office on October 13, 2023, just one day before his death. During that meeting, Raymond requested an emergency amendment to his last will and testament. The amendment removed Marcus as the primary beneficiary of the estate and redirected the bulk of Raymond's assets to a newly established charitable trust focused on educational scholarships. Under the revised terms, Marcus would receive only a modest trust fund, providing $2,000 monthly for living expenses, with no access to principal amounts. The remaining $13 million would be transferred to the Scholarship Foundation upon Raymond's death. Whitmore explained that Raymond appeared resolute but deeply troubled during the meeting. He stated that Marcus had demonstrated irresponsibility with money, refused to seek stable employment, and had recently made demands that Raymond found unacceptable. Raymond specifically mentioned discovering that Marcus had attempted to forge his signature on a loan application using the family home as collateral. That discovery, Whitmore said, convinced Raymond that leaving substantial wealth to his son would be destructive rather than helpful. The amended will was signed, notarized, and filed on October 13 at 4:30 p.m. Raymond left the office with copies of all documents, intending to inform Marcus of the changes during the upcoming weekend. Simmons asked whether Raymond had communicated the amendment to anyone else. Whitmore confirmed that Raymond had not, preferring to handle the conversation privately with his son. This meant Marcus remained unaware of the drastic change to his inheritance expectations. Until the will was formally read, Marcus believed he would inherit the entire $14 million estate. The timing suggested Marcus had acted on October 14, still expecting full access to his father's wealth, unaware that the financial motivation driving his actions had already been eliminated. The formal reading of Raymond's will occurred on October 22, Simmons attended as an observer, positioned discreetly at the back of Whitmore's conference room. Marcus sat across from the attorney, dressed in a dark suit, hands folded on the table. Whitmore began by expressing condolences, then proceeded to outline the estate distribution. As he described the charitable trust and the limited monthly stipend designated for Marcus, the change in Marcus's demeanor was immediate and unmistakable. His jaw tightened, his hands clenched into fists, and his breathing became visibly shallow. When Whitmore finished, Marcus remained silent for nearly 15 seconds before speaking. His first question, "Can this be challenged?" Whitmore explained that the will had been properly executed, witnessed, and filed according to Arizona law. Marcus then asked whether any provisions allowed for modification based on financial hardship. Whitmore replied that the terms were explicit and binding. Marcus stood abruptly, knocking his chair backward, and demanded to know when Raymond had made these changes. When told it was October 13th, Marcus froze, his face drained of color. He lowered himself back into the chair and whispered, almost inaudibly, "The day before." Simmons documented the reaction in her case notes. The phrase, the timing of its utterance, and the visible collapse of composure all indicated Marcus had realized the fatal miscalculation. He had committed murder to secure an inheritance that no longer existed. The irony was not lost on anyone in the room. Whitmore later told Simmons that Marcus's response did not resemble grief or shock over losing an expected inheritance. It resembled the devastation of someone confronting an irreversible mistake. Armed with toxicology results, physical evidence, digital records, and witness testimony regarding the will amendment, Simmons prepared to execute an arrest warrant. Before doing so, she arranged one final interview with Marcus, scheduled for October 23rd at the Scottsdale Police Department. She wanted to observe his behavior when confronted with the full scope of evidence and to provide an opportunity for explanation. Marcus agreed to the meeting without requesting an attorney, a decision Simmons noted as consistent with overconfidence or desperation. Detective Laura Simmons conducted the interview in a standard interrogation room at the Scottsdale Police Department on October 23, 2023. Marcus Caldwell arrived at 2 p.m., dressed casually in jeans and a collared shirt, exhibiting none of the composure he had maintained during earlier interactions. His eyes appeared bloodshot, his movements were restless, and he repeatedly checked his phone before placing it face down on the table. Simmons began by reviewing the timeline of October 14th, asking Marcus to recount the evening in detail once more. His narrative remained consistent with previous statements: dinner preparation, shared meal, sudden collapse, emergency call. Simmons then shifted approach. She placed a folder on the table and extracted the first document, a printout of Marcus's search history. She read several queries aloud, including the searches about untraceable poisons and substances that simulate cardiac arrest. Marcus's face tightened. He claimed the searches were research for a crime fiction project he had been considering writing, an explanation Simmons noted as implausible given the absence of any writing samples or project files on his devices. She asked why someone researching fiction would need to know detection timelines for toxins. Marcus hesitated, then stated he wanted authenticity in his work. Next, Simmons presented the hardware store receipt and surveillance footage showing Marcus purchasing rodenticide, gloves, and a respirator mask. She asked what pest problem required such heavy-duty protection. Marcus replied that the house had rodents in the garage and he wanted to handle the issue thoroughly. When Simmons pointed out that no evidence of rodent activity had been found during the property search, Marcus amended his explanation, saying he purchased the materials preemptively after seeing droppings weeks earlier. Simmons documented the inconsistency. The toxicology report came next. Simmons explained that bromethylene, the same compound found in the rodenticide Marcus purchased, had been detected in Raymond's system at lethal concentrations. She described how forensic testing revealed the substance in the wine reduction sauce and on Raymond's plate, but not on Marcus's. She asked how such selective contamination could occur accidentally. Marcus stared at the document, his hands trembling slightly, and said he had no explanation. He suggested perhaps his father had ingested something earlier in the day without his knowledge. Simmons countered by presenting the chemical analysis showing the compound had been mixed with the sauce during preparation, not consumed separately. She emphasized that the concentration, timing, and method of delivery all indicated deliberate administration during the meal Marcus himself prepared. Marcus leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms defensively, and stated he would not answer further questions without legal representation. Simmons anticipated this response and shifted to her final piece of evidence. She placed the will amendment on the table and explained its contents. Raymond had removed Marcus as primary beneficiary one day before his death, redirecting millions to charity and leaving Marcus with only a modest monthly stipend. Simmons watched Marcus's reaction carefully. His eyes widened, his breathing quickened, and he gripped the edge of the table. She asked whether he had known about the change before his father's death. Marcus shook his head slowly, unable to speak. Simmons pressed, "So you believed you would inherit the full estate when you prepared dinner on October 14th? Marcus's composure shattered. He covered his face with both hands and remained motionless for nearly a minute. When he finally looked up, his eyes were wet, though no tears fell. He whispered that his father had refused to help him, had lectured him constantly about responsibility, and had threatened to cut him off completely unless he found employment. Marcus described feeling trapped, drowning in debt, humiliated by his dependency. He admitted researching ways to resolve his situation quickly, but insisted he never intended to act on those thoughts. Simmons noted the careful phrasing, an acknowledgement of research, but denial of implementation. She asked directly, "Did you poison your father?" Marcus stared at the table and said nothing. Simmons rephrased, "Did you add bromethylene to the wine sauce served to Raymond on October 14th? Marcus closed his eyes, exhaled slowly, and replied, "I want a lawyer." The interview concluded at 3:47 p.m. Simmons informed Marcus that based on the evidence collected, an arrest warrant had been authorized. He was taken into custody immediately and charged with first-degree murder, evidence tampering, and procurement of a toxic substance with intent to harm. The case file was transferred to the Maricopa County Attorney's Office for prosecution. Lead prosecutor Jennifer Ortiz reviewed the evidence and determined it met the threshold for pursuing maximum charges. The physical evidence, digital records, financial motive, and Marcus's inconsistent explanations formed a compelling narrative. Ortiz scheduled the preliminary hearing for November 3, 2023, and began coordinating with expert witnesses including the medical examiner, toxicologist, and forensic digital analyst. The trial of State of Arizona versus Marcus Caldwell commenced on January 8, 2024 in Maricopa County Superior Court. Judge Catherine Morales presided over proceedings in a courtroom filled with media representatives, legal observers, and a handful of Raymond Caldwell's former business colleagues. Marcus sat at the defense table alongside his appointed attorney, David Brennan, a public defender with 18 years of criminal trial experience. Lead prosecutor Jennifer Ortiz opened with a statement emphasizing premeditation, financial desperation, and the calculated nature of the crime. The prosecution's first witness was Dr. Kenneth Reyes, the medical examiner who conducted Raymond's autopsy. Reyes testified that Raymond showed no underlying cardiac disease, and that the gastric tissue damage indicated chemical exposure rather than natural failure. He explained bromethylene's mechanism, describing how the compound disrupted cellular energy production and caused rapid systemic collapse. When asked about concentration levels, Reyes stated the amount detected in Raymond's system could only result from intentional administration, not accidental contact. Cross-examination by Brennan attempted to suggest alternative exposure routes, but Reyes maintained that the compound's presence in the wine sauce and selective contamination of Raymond's plate eliminated accidental scenarios. Forensic toxicologist Dr. Elaine Mercer followed with detailed analysis of the evidence collected from the Caldwell residence. She presented laboratory reports showing bromethylene residue in the roasting pan, specifically in the section where the wine reduction had been prepared. Mercer testified that the compound dissolved readily in oil-based liquids and at the detected concentration would produce minimal taste alteration, making detection by the victim unlikely. She emphasized that contamination appeared on Raymond's plate and utensils but not on Marcus's, a pattern inconsistent with cross-contamination or shared preparation surfaces. Digital forensic specialist Aaron Gutierrez testified about Marcus's search history. He displayed screenshots of queries dated between late September and mid-October, including searches for poisons that mimic heart attacks, rodenticide toxicity levels, and probate timelines. Gutierrez noted that several searches occurred on October 13th, the same day Raymond amended his will, and continued through October 14th, hours before Raymond's death. Defense counsel objected, arguing the searches reflected curiosity rather than intent, but Judge Morales allowed the evidence, noting its temporal proximity to the crime. Hardware store manager Robert Chun identified Marcus from surveillance footage and confirmed the purchase of concentrated rodenticide on October 8th. Chun recalled Marcus asking whether the product worked quickly and if it could be mixed with food. When questioned by the defense about the legitimacy of pest control purchases, Chun testified that customers addressing actual infestations typically ask about application, methods, and safety precautions, not speed of effect or food compatibility. His testimony reinforced the prosecution's theory that Marcus acquired the poison specifically for human use. Financial analyst Michelle Strand presented bank records and debt statements documenting Marcus's deteriorating fiscal situation. She outlined the progression of transfers from Raymond's account, the denial of Marcus's final withdrawal request in early October, and the existence of unpaid loans totaling $68,000. Strand testified that Marcus faced creditor lawsuits and potential bankruptcy if his financial situation remained unchanged. The prosecution used this testimony to establish motive, arguing Marcus viewed his father's death as a solution to insurmountable debt. Attorney Thomas Whitmore provided perhaps the most damaging testimony. He described Raymond's October 13th visit, the emergency will amendment, Raymond's explicit concerns about Marcus's financial irresponsibility. Whitmore testified that Raymond intended to inform Marcus of the changes during the weekend following October 14th, but never had the opportunity. The attorney also recounted Marcus's reaction during the will reading, particularly the moment Marcus realized the amendment occurred one day before the murder. Whitmore stated Marcus appeared devastated not by the loss of his father, but by the timing of the will change. Defense attorney Brennan attempted to construct reasonable doubt by suggesting Raymond might have accidentally ingested the compound through environmental exposure, or that contamination occurred during evidence handling. He called a defense toxicologist who testified that bromethylene could theoretically transfer through surface contact, though she acknowledged the concentration detected in Raymond's system made this scenario implausible. Brennan also emphasized the absence of direct witnesses to the poisoning and the circumstantial nature of the timeline evidence. Closing arguments began on January 19th. Ortiz methodically outlined the evidence: financial desperation, incriminating search history, purchase of lethal poison, selective contamination of Raymond's food, and the tragic irony of a murder committed for an inheritance that no longer existed. She argued Marcus demonstrated premeditation through research, acquisition of materials, and careful execution of a plan designed to appear like natural death. Brennan countered by highlighting gaps in direct proof, arguing the state had constructed a narrative from circumstantial threads without definitive evidence. Marcus physically added poison to his father's meal. He appealed to the jury's requirement for proof beyond reasonable doubt. The jury began deliberations on January 22, 2024, at 10 a.m. 12 individuals, representing diverse backgrounds and professions, retreated to the deliberation room with instructions from Judge Catherine Morales emphasizing the burden of proof and the necessity of unanimous agreement. The evidence binders, forensic reports, witness testimony transcripts, and photographic exhibits accompanied them. Outside the courtroom, Detective Laura Simmons waited alongside Prosecutor Jennifer Ortiz, both anticipating a lengthy deliberation given the circumstantial nature of portions of the case. The wait proved shorter than expected. After 7 hours of discussion, the jury notified the bailiff they had reached a verdict. Court reconvened at 5:15 p.m. The courtroom filled rapidly as word spread that a decision had been made. Marcus Caldwell sat motionless at the defense table, hands folded, staring at the surface before him. His attorney, David Brennan, leaned close and whispered something inaudible. Marcus did not respond. Judge Morales addressed the jury foreman asking whether a unanimous verdict had been reached. The foreman, a retired engineer in his 60s, confirmed affirmatively. The court clerk accepted the written verdict and handed it to the judge. Morales reviewed the document silently before reading aloud. On the charge of first-degree murder, guilty. On the charge of evidence tampering, guilty. on the charge of unlawful procurement of a toxic substance. Guilty. Marcus closed his eyes as each word was spoken. His shoulders sagged, and for the first time throughout the trial, visible tears tracked down his face. Sentencing was scheduled for February 9, 2024. During the intervening weeks, the probation department prepared a pre-sentence investigation report outlining Marcus's background, criminal history, psychological evaluations, and impact statements. Raymond's business colleagues submitted letters describing his integrity, generosity, and dedication to community improvement. Several emphasized the scholarship foundation he established would benefit hundreds of students who otherwise could not afford higher education. The irony remained inescapable. Raymond's wealth would create opportunities for strangers while his own son faced life imprisonment. The sentencing hearing began with victim impact statements. Patricia Brennan, Raymond's accountant, read a statement on behalf of Raymond's colleagues describing the loss to the investment community and the charitable organizations he supported. She stated Raymond had planned to expand his philanthropic efforts after retirement and had expressed hope that Marcus would eventually find purpose beyond financial dependency. The statement concluded with a reflection on the tragedy of a father's love being answered with calculated murder. Judge Morales then addressed Marcus directly, asking whether he wished to make a statement before sentencing. Marcus stood slowly, gripping the table edge for support. His voice was barely audible as he spoke. He stated he never intended for things to escalate as they did, that financial pressure and desperation clouded his judgment, and that he regretted every decision leading to October 14th. He paused, struggling to continue, then added that learning about the will amendment had been the worst moment of his life, not because he lost the money, but because it meant his father had given up on him before he even knew. Judge Morales listened without interruption. When Marcus finished, she reviewed the sentencing guidelines and the aggravating factors present in the case: premeditation, betrayal of familial trust, and the calculated nature of the crime. She noted the absence of mitigating factors beyond Marcus's lack of prior criminal record. After a brief pause, she announced the sentence: life imprisonment without possibility of parole for the murder conviction, with additional concurrent sentences for the subsidiary charges. Marcus would spend the remainder of his life in custody. As bailiffs escorted Marcus from the courtroom, he glanced back briefly toward the gallery where Raymond's former colleagues sat. His expression reflected not defiance or anger, but exhaustion and resignation. Detective Simmons, observing from the rear of the courtroom, later noted that Marcus appeared to finally understand the magnitude of what he had destroyed. Not just his father's life, but his own future, his father's legacy, and any possibility of redemption. In the months following sentencing, the scholarship foundation established through Raymond's estate began awarding grants. The first recipients included students from underserved communities pursuing degrees in business, engineering, and education. Foundation administrators noted that Raymond's vision emphasized providing opportunities to individuals who demonstrated determination. Despite financial obstacles, the very qualities he had hoped his son would develop. Marcus Caldwell was transferred to Arizona State Prison Complex in Florence, where he began serving his sentence. Prison records indicated he enrolled in educational programs and maintained minimal contact with the outside world. Requests for interviews were consistently declined. The case file, now closed, remained a stark example of how greed, desperation, and miscalculation could converge into irreversible tragedy. The final irony endured. Marcus Caldwell murdered his father to claim an inheritance of $14 million. Only to discover the fortune had been redirected to charity 24 hours before the crime. He gained nothing. He lost everything. And Raymond's wealth, which could have supported his son's rehabilitation and growth, instead funded the dreams of strangers who would never know the price paid for their education. The case concluded, but its lessons remained. A reminder that desperation distorts judgment, that assumptions can prove fatal, and that some mistakes cannot be undone.